Hello everyone, my name is Kelly Penzen and thank you for taking the time to review my capstone proposal. My project is titled, The Impact of School-Based Emotional Regulation Interventions on Behavioral Outcomes in Elementary Age Students. As someone who works in education is completing a master's degree in psychology with a concentration in child and developmental psychology, I wanted to explore a topic that combines both of those interests. Throughout this presentation, I will discuss the problem I identified, the intervention I am proposing, the research design I would use to evaluate it, and why I believe this topic is important for students, educators, and schools. Behavioral challenges in elementary school classrooms are becoming an increasing concern for educators and school support staff. Many students struggle with emotional regulation, impulse control, frustration tolerance, and other executive functioning skills that are necessary for success both academically and socially. When these challenges are not addressed early, they can negatively affect classroom learning, peer relationships, and overall school adjustment. While schools often recognize these concerns, access to structured and evidence-based interventions can vary greatly between districts and even between individual schools. The proposal to follow, therefore, focuses on addressing these challenges before they become more serious and long-lasting. So why does this topic matter? Why is it important? Well, I chose this topic because it connects directly to experiences I have had while working in education. Over the years, I have worked with students who struggled with emotional regulation and behavioral challenges of all sorts. What stood out to me was that many of these students were not intentionally misbehaving. Instead, they often lacked the skills needed to manage their emotions, to solve problems, or respond appropriately in difficult situations. Research suggests that emotional regulation plays a significant role in school adjustment and behavioral outcomes. Because of this, I believe early intervention has the potential to make a meaningful difference in students' academic, social, and emotional development. Starting with the purpose statement, the purpose here is to evaluate whether a school-based emotional regulation intervention improves behavioral outcomes among elementary students. In other words, is to examine whether school-based emotional regulation intervention can improve behavioral outcomes among elementary students who demonstrate behavioral concerns of different varieties. My primary question, therefore, is how do school-based emotional regulation interventions impact behavioral outcomes among elementary age students? Can participation in a school-based emotional regulation intervention improve these behavioral outcomes among elementary students exhibiting behavioral difficulties? Do interventions improve executive functioning skills? How do teachers perceive these behavioral changes? And which behavioral outcomes improve most significantly? These are some of the supporting questions. To support this, I would also explore whether the intervention improves emotional regulation skills. I'm just bringing this up again because we will later discuss on what exactly executive functioning entails. In terms of the theoretical framework, the theoretical foundation for this proposal is based on both executive functioning theory and social-emotional learning theory. Executive functioning refers to cognitive skills such as impulse control, working memory, attention regulation, and self-monitoring. These skills help children manage their behavior and emotions effectively. Social emotional learning focuses on developing self-awareness, emotional regulation, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Together, these frameworks suggest that strengthening emotional regulation and executive functioning skills may lead to improvements in classroom behavior and overall student success. So what does the research have to say about this? The literature consistently seems to support the importance of emotional regulation and social emotional learning in schools. Adinsky and colleagues found that emotional regulation skills are strongly associated with positive school adjustment outcomes in young children. Wyman and colleagues demonstrated that interventions focused on emotional self-regulation resulted in improved school behavior among children with emerging mental health concerns. Similarly, Najardvik and colleagues found that emotion regulation treatment significantly reduced disruptive behavior problems in children. Greenberg's review of social emotional learning programs also highlighted the positive impacts on behavior, emotional well-being, and academic outcomes. Collectively, these studies suggest that interventions targeting emotional regulation can be effective, but additional research is needed to understand how these interventions can be implemented and evaluated in elementary school settings. This leads to some more discussion about the research gap. What is missing? Although existing research supports emotional regulation interventions, several gaps do remain. Many studies focus on short-term outcomes or specific clinical populations. Fewer studies examine how emotional regulation interventions can be implemented within everyday school environments for elementary students who are at risk for behavioral difficulties. There is also a need for research that examines both behavioral outcomes and executive functioning skills together, since those areas are closely connected. This proposal aims to address these gaps by focusing on a school-based intervention that could be realistically implemented within an elementary school setting. This proposal uses a quantitative, quasi-experimental pre-test, post-test design. Participants would include approximately 60 elementary students identified by teachers as demonstrating behavioral concerns related to emotional regulation. Students would participate in an 8-week emotional regulation intervention delivered within the school setting. Data would be collected before and after the intervention to determine whether meaningful changes occurred in emotional regulation, executive functioning, and behavioral outcomes. To measure outcomes, I would use 2 established assessment tools. The first is the Behavioral Assessment System for Children, 3rd edition, or the BASC-3, which measures a variety of behavioral and emotional concerns. The second is the Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Function, 2nd edition, or BRIEF 2, which evaluates executive functioning skills. Both instruments have demonstrated strong reliability and validity in research and educational settings. Data would be analyzed using statistical methods such as paired sample t-tests to compare student scores before and after the intervention. This would help determine whether participation in an intervention was associated with significant improvements. Ethical considerations are, no surprisingly, particularly important here because this proposed study does involve children. Participation would require informed parental consent and student assent. Participation would also be completely voluntary, and students would be able to withdraw at any time without penalty. Confidentiality would be maintained by signing identification numbers rather than using student names. Data would be stored securely and only accessible to authorized researchers. Additionally, cultural sensitivity would be an important consideration through the intervention process to ensure that students from diverse backgrounds are respected and supported appropriately. The intentions behind the interventions. Before the intervention, you would see their behavioral challenges. After the intervention, the intentions are you'll see some improved self-regulation skills. The emotional outbursts before the intervention would therefore lead to better coping skills with intervention. Classroom disruptions would lead to, if everything works, improved classroom behavior. Furthermore, for the expected outcomes and implications for schools, based on previous research, I would expect students participating in the intervention to demonstrate improved emotional regulation skills, stronger executive functioning abilities, and reductions in disruptive or problematic behaviors. If these outcomes were observed, the findings could provide additional support for implementing emotional regulation programs within elementary schools. The results could help educators, school psychologists, and administrators make informed decisions about early intervention practices that support student well-being and academic success. In conclusion, this proposal addresses an important issue facing many elementary schools today: how to effectively support students who struggle with emotional regulation and behavioral challenges. Research suggests that earlier intervention can play a critical role in helping students develop the skills they need for long-term success. By examining the effectiveness of a school-based emotional regulation intervention, this proposed study seeks to contribute to both psychological research and educational practice. Thank you for taking the time to review my project. I appreciate the opportunity to share my work and knowledge I've gained throughout my master's program. Thank you. And then these are my references.